A pack did not fail in a single battle, Genevieve had believed. It failed in quieter places, where ledgers were altered, fear was fed, and people who once shared bread learned to trade truth for relief. The first lie was always practical. The second was always moral. By the third, everyone called cruelty order and slept better for naming it duty. Standing in the center of Ironhold's tribunal yard with her wrists chained and her belly heavy under a torn winter dress, Genevieve understood, with a clarity that made her teeth ache, that collapse had already happened long before they pronounced her sentence. Rain struck the flagstones in thin needles, torches hissed, wolves in human skin stood in ranks beneath the eaves, avoiding her gaze until they did not, then looking too long, as if betrayal had changed the shape of her face. Her ankles were swollen inside split boots. The child had been restless all morning, sharp heels and elbows pressing under her ribs, and each movement made the chain across her wrists scrape bone. Alpha Aldrich Ironhold sat above her in the carved chair of black oak and antler, hands resting on his knees like a judge in a story told to frighten children into obedience. He did not look angry. Anger required engagement. He looked finished. The accused has no mate to vouch for character. Elder Morel read from a slate, voice carrying clean and cold over the rain. No surviving parents, no bonded rank, assigned function, accounts clerk for patrol quartermaster. Charges: transfer of route schedules and sentry rotations to unknown buyers over 4 moons. Evidence: copied ledger pages recovered from South Crossing. Genevieve lifted her chin through the movement pulled at the tight muscles in her lower back. Those pages were forged. Morel did not pause. Witnesses: 3. Her former supervisor stepped forward first, eyes darting, fingers worrying the cuff of his coat. I saw her in the records room after curfew, Alpha. More than once. You signed those entries, Genevieve said, voice rough with a night spent on stone and no water. You asked me to stay late when quarter reports changed. He stared at her belly, not her face. I signed what she prepared. The second witness, a patrol beta who had once shared dried pears with her during inventory season, swallowed and said he had seen her pass coded slips to a runner beyond the tannery wall. The third claimed she had asked pointed questions about eastern blind paths. Each statement came clipped, memorized, polished smooth by repetition. None met her eyes. When she tried to speak again, Aldrich raised one hand. Your record would have protected you, he said, until the sealed chest was found in your rooms. My rooms were searched without summons. The seal on that chest was broken already. He watched rain run off the edge of the tribunal roof. The pack cannot survive with leaks. The child kicked hard enough to bend her forward. She inhaled through it, palms spread over the top curve of her abdomen, counting under her breath until the tightening eased. Around the yard, someone laughed softly, not cruel so much as relieved it was not their body betraying them in public. Morel lifted the slate again. Sentence under Winter Security Code, 1 year penal labor, Thornwood Obsidian Works. No appeal. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not because it was unjust, but because it was final. Thornwood mines were where inconvenient wolves were converted into cautionary tales. Genevieve looked up at Aldrich one last time. You know I did not do this. His jaw worked once. I know what my pack needs to believe. The words struck harder than the chain when the guards yanked her toward the gate. By dawn the next day, Ironhold's sigil had been cut from her sleeve and replaced with a prisoner knot burned into rough cloth at her shoulder. The wagon south smelled of damp straw, old fear, and iron rust. 3 other condemned women rode in silence, each staring at a different point as if the world might unmake itself if she held still enough. Genevieve braced with one hand on the side rail and one on her belly every time the wheels hit ruts, whispering an old counting rhyme her mother had used during storms. She did not pray. Prayer required trust in listeners. Thornwood territory rose from black hills like a wound that had learned to scar. Burnt tree trunks speared the ridges. New timber frames stood beside old stone foundations charred at the edges, evidence of something ravaged and stubborn enough to rebuild anyway. Smoke from forges drifted low and metallic. At the mine gate, carved obsidian pillars framed a descent stair cut straight into the earth, each step wet with mineral sheen. A foreman with scarred hands and a voice like gravel read intake names. Work crews rotate by bell. Refusal means restraints and reduced rations. Collapse protocol. Leave tools. Move to marked ladders. Anyone who runs outside assigned sectors is whipped and doubled next shift. His eyes landed on Genevieve's belly and narrowed as if she were a logistical inconvenience, not a person. You carry stone too. Thornwood doesn't feed dead weight. He snapped iron cuffs around her wrists with a linking chain short enough to force a half-hunched posture. Mine gas hit halfway down, sweet and rotten together, a scent that sat at the back of the throat and would not leave. Lantern light made every face look hollow. The tunnel walls glittered with black glass seams that cut skin if touched wrong. Picks rang an uneven rhythm. Coughs stitched the echoes between blows. Shaft 7 lay deeper, where air thinned and heat pulsed from fissures in slow breaths. Genevieve was assigned to sorting rubble at the cart line, lifting fractured obsidian into bins marked by grade. Every lift dragged at her spine. Every bend sent pressure downward that made her pause, close her eyes, and wait for her body to unclench. She had known hunger before, shame before, sleeplessness before. She had never known this precise terror of timing, the fear that labor might begin under stone with no midwife and no mercy. At first, bell break, she asked for water. The guard near the cistern spat to the side. Traders drink last. I am dizzy. Then sway quieter. By second bell, the edge of her vision had begun to pulse. Sounds came muffled, as if cloth had been wrapped around her ears. She leaned one shoulder against the wall, counting breaths again. Inhale for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. The child rolled once, then drove a heel under her ribs so sharply she gasped. A miner beside her, gray at the temples and missing 2 fingers, glanced over and muttered without moving his lips. Keep your knees soft, lock, and you drop. Thank you, she whispered. He did not answer. Kindness in places like this had to look accidental. The breaking point arrived in the thin hour before shift change, when a tremor shivered through shaft 7 and dust rained from the ceiling in a glittering veil. Bells did not ring. No collapse order came. Men cursed and kept swinging. Then a pocket of trapped gas burst somewhere upline with a dull, concussive cough. Lanterns fluttered blue. One went out entirely. Stay on task, the foreman shouted. No one leaves line without direct order. Genevieve's next breath burned. The tunnel tilted. She dropped one knee to the ground, chain-scraping stone, and pressed both hands under her abdomen as a hard tightening wrapped from spine to front and held. Not labor, she told herself. Stress, gas, fear. The rational words broke apart under the pressure. I need air, she said. The foreman strode over, jaw set. He smelled of smoke and old leather. You need to work. Another contraction took her voice. She braced on her palms, forehead nearly touching black dust. He lifted a rod and struck the cart beside her, metal cracking against metal inches from her shoulder. Up. The child kicked in answer, frantic and strong, and panic finally burned through humiliation. If she stayed obedient, she would die obedient. If she waited for permission, no one would grant it. Genevieve shoved herself upright, ignored the vertigo rolling through her skull, and moved. The chain between her wrists made running clumsy and brutal. She stumbled once, caught herself on a splintered support post, and kept going toward the ladder markers painted in faded white arrows along the wall. Behind her, the foreman shouted for guards. Boots pounded. Someone grabbed at her sleeve and tore the seam but missed skin. She ducked under a low beam, lungs clawing for clean air that did not exist, and followed the draft she could barely feel with her face. 2 turns later, the tunnel opened into a crosscut where fresher air bled down from the upper shaft. She reached it, touched the wall, and nearly sobbed from relief. Then the world narrowed to a pinprick of light. Her knees folded. She did not hit fully. A pair of hands caught her under the arms and lowered her to the rock with startling care. Voices layered above her, urgent, then abruptly silent in a wave that rolled down the tunnel faster than footsteps. Heavy boots approached, measured, controlled. Not a guard's hurry, command. When she forced her eyes open, she saw him descending from the upper passage through drifting black dust, broad shoulders wrapped in a dark coat lined at the collar with winter fur, a scar tracking from his temple to his jaw like pale lightning over bronze skin. The miners stepped back without being told. Even the foreman lowered his gaze. Sebastian Thornwood, alpha of the broken and rebuilt territory, came down into Shaft 7 himself. His gaze found her and locked. Amber bled into his irises so quickly it looked like fire poured into glass. A hot thread snapped through Genevieve's sternum, so fierce she grabbed for the wall though she was already on the ground, and a second pulse answered from deep in her belly. The child kicked hard under her palm. Sebastian stopped as if struck, then dropped to one knee in the dust before her, fury and reverence warring across his face, while the tunnel held its breath. For one suspended heartbeat, Genevieve could not tell whether the force in her chest was terror or recognition. It hurt like both. Heat pulsed beneath her skin in rapid waves, as if someone had struck flint against bone and caught an old buried tinder. The child answered with another hard kick, not random this time, but precise, almost insistent, and the shock of that response made her breath stutter. Sebastian Thornwood's hand hovered over her shackled wrists without touching. His fingers were scarred across the knuckles, calloused like a laborer's rather than a distant ruler's, and she noticed that detail first because noticing details had kept her alive in rooms where truth was negotiated. He took one sharp inhale, then another, his pupils widening until very little human remained in his gaze. The predator surfaced in him and then, with visible effort, settled under discipline. "Water," he said, not loudly, yet the command cut through the shaft. "Healer, keys for prisoner restraints. Now." The foreman stepped forward half a pace, rod still in his hand. "Alpha," she broke line protocol and attempted escape during gas flare. "She is under penalty from Ironhold, and we were instructed." Sebastian did not look at him. "You were instructed to keep workers alive long enough to rebuild this territory. Explain how striking a collapsing female carrying a near-term child serves that objective." The foreman swallowed. "She is accused of selling roots. If word spreads that—" Now Sebastian turned. The movement was slight, almost lazy and far more frightening than a shouted threat. "If word spreads that Thornwood punishes before verifying, we are no better than the packs that fed us their refugees and then burned them." His voice dropped, rough with a fury held on a short leash. "Drop the rod." Metal clanged against stone. Genevieve had survived interrogation by learning to split herself in two, one part that felt, one part that recorded. The recording part noted everything despite the dizziness. The way miners were not gawking now but watching with wary concentration. The way 2 guards had shifted to block the foreman, not her. The way Sebastian kept himself at her level in the dust, as if rank meant less than proximity in this moment. The feeling in her chest refused to be catalogued. "I am not safe, because he is gentle now. I am not safe, because he knelt. I am not safe because my body wants to lean toward him. I know this pattern. Power can wear kindness for an hour, for a day, for a season. I have seen men use mercy as theater and call it justice. But this thread pulling through my ribs is real, and the child is answering it. And that is a truth no tribunal can forge. If I step toward it, I could lose what little control remains. If I refuse it, I might still lose everything. I am so tired of choosing between ruin and ruin. I need air. I need water. I need one thing in this world that is not a lie. A guard arrived with a dented flask, and Sebastian took it from him before kneeling closer. Small sips, he said to Genevieve, voice lower now. Not command, but care shaped into restraint. If you drink too fast, you will be sick. She hesitated. Her wrists shook from exertion and chain weight. He saw the hesitation and unscrewed the cap, pouring a little onto his own palm first, then drinking from that hand. A simple demonstration against poison fear so instinctive it almost undid her. Only then did she drink. Cool water slid over her tongue and down a throat raw from gas, and she nearly cried from the relief of it. Sebastian watched every swallow like it mattered. When she coughed, he shifted closer, one hand open near her shoulder without touching until she nodded once. The contact, when it came, was brief and steady, anchoring rather than claiming. A current moved through her anyway, a bright, unnerving pull that started under his palm and arrowed straight into her sternum. The keys arrived. Sebastian held out his hand. The guard passed them over with both palms, deferential and shaking. Alpha, the older miner with missing fingers said suddenly, voice rough from dust. She asked for water at first bell. Denied. Asked again before second. Denied. Sebastian looked from the miner to the foreman. Name. Rurik Vale, Cartline. Rurik Vale reported negligence in my hearing. Sebastian's eyes never left the foreman. Recorded at surface office before night meal. If it vanishes from ledger, your quartermaster joins you in judgment. Genevieve flinched at the word ledger, old betrayal biting fresh. Sebastian heard the breath hitch and shifted his attention back to her immediately, as if the reaction mattered more than the accusation hanging in the air. He set the key into the first cuff. The lock stuck. He did not curse. He did not force her wrist to stillness. He braced the chain with one hand, careful not to twist her joint, and tried again until the mechanism clicked open. The iron fell away from her skin with a weighty scrape that felt like a boundary giving way. When the second cuff opened, she rubbed her raw wrists and stared at the half-moon indentations the metal had left. Sebastian stripped off his gloves and wrapped them loosely around her hands before she could protest. You need warmth, he said. I need to know why, she answered, the words out before caution could stop them. His expression changed in a way that was almost imperceptible and completely unmistakable. Not surprise. Recognition of the same question already burning in him. By the time the upper bell sounded shift change, the shaft had transformed around them. Orders moved in clipped bursts. 2 lantern crews relit the blue flickering stretch near the gas pocket. A healer descended with satchel and wool blankets. Guards who had ignored her minutes before now watched cross passages and counted heads with military precision. Thornwood did not look gentle from inside its machinery. It looked efficient, scarred, and alert. The healer, a broad-shouldered woman with silver threaded through her braid, crouched beside Genevieve and pressed cool fingers to her pulse. Any fluid loss? No. Regular contractions. Tightening. Not patterned. The healer nodded. Stress response and gas irritation likely, but we monitor upstairs. Her gaze flicked to Sebastian. She should not return below. She will not, he said. The foreman opened his mouth, then closed it when Sebastian lifted his chin. No argument survived that look. Genevieve tried to stand and failed on the first attempt. The tunnel swayed. Sebastian caught her elbow, then paused, waiting for permission that no one in power had ever bothered to request from her before. She gave the smallest nod. He slid an arm behind her back and brought her up in one controlled movement, taking enough of her weight to spare her abdomen while letting her feet stay under her. Respect in the mechanics. Respect in the pause. When she wobbled, his coat brushed her cheek. Rain on iron. Cedar smoke. Under it, something warmer and wild that made awareness prick up along her spine. Her body recognized him faster than her mind allowed. They moved toward the lift platform at the main shaft throat. Miners stepped aside without being told, their faces closed, curious, wary. Not all hostility had dissolved. She felt it in the space between shoulders, in the mutters swallowed too late. Spy got lucky. Or cursed us all. Look how he looks at her. The last whisper carried because silence followed it. Sebastian stopped at the base of the lift and turned just enough that everyone could see his face. Hear this clearly, he said. No worker under Thornwood law is denied water. No pregnant female is assigned subterranean punishment. Any hand raised against either order is a hand raised against me. The words dropped into the mine like stones into deep water, rings of consequence moving outward. Genevieve felt the crowd recalculating, not convinced yet, but forced to account for a new rule spoken in public. She had lived through enough legal theater to know the difference between private pity and enforceable decree. This was the latter. He faced her again. Can you stand through the ascent? Yes. Pride answered first. Honesty followed. If I lock my knees, I will fall. One corner of his mouth almost lifted, tension breaking and brief. Then we both bend. The lift creaked upward, chains grinding overhead, carrying them through damp stone and pockets of colder air. Genevieve gripped the side rail with gloved hands and fixed her eyes on the square of growing light above. Sebastian stood close enough to steady her if needed, far enough not to crowd. The bond between them stretched and tightened with every foot gained, a living line she could neither sever nor trust. The child shifted again, then settled, as if listening. At the surface entrance, wind hit her face with knife-cold clarity. She drew it in greedily. Thornwood's compound spread beyond the mine mouth in stark layers. Half-rebuilt barracks of fresh pine, forge yards glowing orange under slate clouds, and farther up the slope, an old longhouse with burn marks still staining the stone lintels. People moved everywhere with the purposeful haste of a territory rebuilding against winter's clock. This was not Ironhold's polished cruelty. This was survival with its teeth bared. Sebastian took off his fur-lined cloak and set it over her shoulders, the weight and heat of it engulfing her. Healer's Loft, he told his guard captain. Sunside, 2 sentries outside, chosen by Captain Elia only. No one enters without healer approval or her consent. Genevieve looked up at him sharply. You do not know me. I know enough, he said, and for the first time the iron certainty in his voice cracked into something raw. I know the bond did not ask my permission any more than yours. Her breath caught. Around them, workers pretended not to listen and failed. He held her gaze, and the world narrowed again to that line between them, fierce and frightening and luminous as forged metal. I will not cage you, he said. I will not parade you. I will not touch you without your leave. But I will not let you be harmed, not here, not again. She had no prepared answer for vows she had not requested and desperately wanted to believe. The knot behind her ribs loosened and tightened at once. Genevieve, he said quietly, tasting her name like an oath. If you can give me one true thing now, give me this. Are you in active labor? She put a hand over the side of her abdomen and waited through one long breath, then another, scanning for the next wave. None came. No, not yet. Relief crossed his face so intensely it looked like pain. Then we have time, he said. For what? She did not ask. because his hand had lifted, not to command, but to offer his arm in full view of his people, waiting without pressure, waiting long enough that choice became real. The bond hummed like a struck wire through her blood. Fear stood on one side, hunger for home stood on the other. Genevieve placed her hand on his arm, and the contact sent a bright, steady heat through both of them that neither tried to hide. Genevieve kept her hand on Sebastian's arm as he guided her across the yard, not because she trusted him yet, but because the ground still seemed to tilt in slow, treacherous waves, and her body had spent all its strength on survival. Workers watched from forge doors and stair rails, some openly, some through lowered lashes, measuring what this new proximity might cost them. Sebastian did not tighten his hold to make a spectacle of possession. He simply adjusted his pace to hers, one careful step at a time, as if escorting her without claiming her was a line he intended to hold in public and private alike. The healer's loft sat above the infirmary, where the mine slope flattened toward a stand of wind-torn pines. Sunlight, thin and winter-pale, stretched over wooden floorboards worn smooth by years of boots and worry. Shelves held jars of willow bark, dried yarrow, feverfew, and crushed charcoal. A basin steamed near the hearth. The silver-haired healer met them at the threshold with the brisk authority of someone who answered first to bodies, then to rank. She needs clean clothes, warm broth, and uninterrupted rest, the healer said, taking Genevieve's pulse again. No stress spikes, no crowding. If contractions settle, we monitor. If they pattern, I send for birthing linens and keep everyone out. Sebastian nodded once. What do you need from me? Space, the healer said, and guards who follow my orders, not rumors. You have both. He turned to Genevieve then, gaze steady and searching, the bond between them taut as drawn wire. May I remove the chain belt? His voice was low enough that only she and the healer heard. It is still around your waist from intake. No one had asked for permission all day. The question landed harder than command. She swallowed, then nodded. He moved slowly, narrating each touch before it happened. I am at your left side. I am unhooking the clasp now. His fingers never brushed skin as he worked metal free from cloth. When the belt came loose, it dropped with a dull clatter that made her flinch. He set it on a far table, away from her sightline, then stepped back until an arm's length separated them. You are safe in this room, he said. The healer snorted softly. She will decide that herself, Alpha. A flicker of something like respect crossed his scarred face. She will. He could have stayed. He could have invoked pack law, the bond, his rank, a dozen ancient customs designed to make a female's body territory once marked by fate. Genevieve knew those customs by heart. She had balanced the accounts that compensated males for bond stabilization confinement in 3 different districts. Instead, Sebastian reached up and unclasped the obsidian wolf sigil pinned at his collar, the visible token of his authority, and set it on the windowsill before backing toward the door. I will be outside, he said. If you want me gone from the corridor, tell Captain Ilya, and I will move to the lower stair. She stared at him, trying to find the hidden hook in the offer. Why? For the first time since the mine, he looked briefly toward the far wall, where old burn marks traced dark fingers through the plaster. Because power without restraint is what destroyed my pack. He met her gaze again. I do not repeat old ruins. Then he left, shutting the door with a quiet click, rather than the final slam of imprisonment. The healer, whose name turned out to be Mara, helped Genevieve out of her dust-stiff dress and into a wool shift, bathed the grit from her skin, checked bruising, and pressed warm cloths against the tight bands wrapping her abdomen. The child shifted under Mara's palms, strong and stubborn, then settled when broth heat reached Genevieve's stomach. By late afternoon, the contractions had thinned to distant warnings. Exhaustion rolled over her in heavy tides, but sleep stayed ragged, torn by memory and the persistent hum of the bond. I am lying in a room that smells like mint and smoke instead of rot and gas, and my body keeps waiting for the blow that follows relief. I know this rhythm. Kindness, then cost. Safety, then debt collected with interest. If he wanted leverage, he has every piece of me already. My name, my sentence, my child. This thread between us I never consented to and cannot deny. I should build walls. I should keep my voice flat. My choice is small. My heart locked behind numbers and procedures where no one can reach it. Yet when he stepped back, he gave me room no one has offered in years. I do not know what to do with room. I do not know how to rest in it without fearing I will be charged for the air. Evening deepened. Wind tapped bare branches against the loft roof. At one point, when a sharp cramp seized low and hard, she bit her lip to muffle the sound. The door opened instantly, not wide, only enough for Sebastian's shoulder and worried eyes to appear. Mara said no entry, she managed through clenched teeth. I am not entering. He stayed in the doorway, hands visible, careful to keep one boot on the threshold as if obeying a sacred boundary. Do you need more heat stones? Mara answered from the hearth. I need you to stop hovering like a storm cloud. She needs calm. A beat passed. Then, surprisingly, Sebastian inclined his head. Understood. He withdrew. The door shut again. Night gathered into full dark. Genevieve drifted in and out, waking to small sounds. Mara grinding herbs, floorboards settling, distant forge hammers finally falling silent. Once, near midnight, she woke with her heart racing from a dream of tribunal chains and reached for the wall before memory returned. Through the wood, from the corridor, she heard a voice murmuring numbers, not prayers, counting. She pushed herself upright, wincing, and moved to the door. The latch lifted with a soft scrape. Sebastian sat on the floor outside with his back against the opposite wall, forearms on bent knees, head tipped slightly as he listened toward her room. He looked less like a ruler there and more like a sentinel carved out of fatigue and stubborn will. A lantern at his side threw amber light over the scar along his jaw. He looked up immediately. Contraction. Gone. She studied him. Were you counting? Your breathing changed every time pain hit. He gave a brief, self-conscious exhale that could almost have been humor. I counted to keep from breaking Mara's rules. The honesty undid something tight in her chest. He shifted but did not stand. When the ridge camps burned, I arrived 3 hours too late to the North Quarter. I found names, not people. Since then I keep watch when I can. It does not fix what I failed to protect, but it keeps me from lying to myself about effort. His gaze dropped to her abdomen, then rose back to her face, deliberate, respectful. I could not save mine. I will not fail your child. The words landed with the weight of oath, grief, and decision braided together. Genevieve rested her hand on the doorframe until the tremor in her legs eased. You do not owe my child atonement. No, he said quietly. I owe your child safety. Different debt. By the time first pale light touched the loft windows, he was still there, chin bowed, counting softly each time she breathed through another cramp. He never crossed the threshold. By the next midday meal, after a morning of broth and enforced bed rest that made her restless and raw, Mara declared a short walk to the communal yard acceptable if Genevieve stayed above ground, kept warm, and sat at the first sign of pressure. Hunger pulled her downstairs, along with a harder need to see the faces of the pack she might be forced to live among. The ration line stretched from the cookhouse steps to the old cistern wall. Miners and widows and apprentices holding tin bowls under a slate sky. Conversation thinned when she joined the queue. 2 women ahead of her angled their shoulders away. A man near the back muttered, "Just loud enough." Starfall's dog carries her payment in her belly. Another voice answered, Thornwood feeds traitors first now. Genevieve kept her spine straight and focused on the steam rising from the kettle. She had survived worse than words. Words only cut if she offered skin. A foreman she recognized from Shaft 7 strode across the yard, rod tucked under one arm, mouth already set for judgment. You, he barked. Healer's rest is over. Cart line is short 3 hands. Move. Mara, standing beside the cookhouse door, snapped. She is restricted. The foreman ignored her and stepped close enough that coal smoke and stale ale clung to Genevieve's lungs. Restriction ends when work demands, unless Alpha intends to crown prisoners now. He lifted the rod and jabbed it toward her shoulder. It never landed. Sebastian crossed the yard so fast the motion registered as a blur of dark coat and controlled violence. His hand closed around the iron rod mid-swing, fingers locking with a crack of metal against bone. He did not roar. He did not posture. He simply held the foreman's gaze and bent the rod in half, slow and inexorable, until iron screamed and gave way. The yard fell silent except for the hiss of cook fires. State your name, Sebastian said. The foreman's face had gone gray. Thomas Var. Thomas Var raised a weapon against a medically restricted pregnant female under healer order. Sebastian let the bent rod drop at Thomas's boots. That is attempted harm under my law. Thomas found his voice in a thin rush. She is condemned by Ironhold. The whole eastern ridge says she fed patrol routes to Starfall. If we shelter her, we invite raids. Sebastian's expression did not shift, but his gaze went feral. Something ancient and lethal looking out through amber-lit eyes. Listen carefully, all of you. He turned so the entire line could hear, his voice carried to the far wall and back. As declared at the lift, Thornwood Code stands and is now sealed in open ledger. No pregnant female, convicted or accused, is sentenced to subterranean labor. Any challenge to healer directives regarding such a female will be prosecuted as treason against the Alpha's direct command. Water denial remains punishable by quarter forfeiture and trial. Scribe this in open ledger, witnessed now by Captain Ilya, healer Mara, and the guild cooks. Mara lifted her chin. Witnessed. Captain Ilya, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd with 2 guards, answered. Witnessed and recorded. Murmurs broke like surf against stone, shock colliding with calculation. Some faces hardened, some softened despite themselves. Genevieve saw Rurik Vale near the cistern, missing fingers wrapped around a bowl, watching with an unreadable expression that had changed from wary to thoughtful. Sebastian faced Thomas again. You are stripped of foreman authority pending tribunal review. Report to quarter office and surrender shift keys. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away on unsteady legs. Only then did Sebastian turn to Genevieve, publicly, deliberately. He offered his arm, palm open, waiting in complete stillness while dozens of eyes fixed on her choice. No one could mistake the meaning. If she took it, she accepted visible protection and the storm that came with it. If she refused, he had promised not to coerce and would be bound by his own words. The bond thrummed between them, insistent but no longer frantic. Genevieve looked at his hand, then at his face, and saw no hunger to own, only a fierce patience that made space for her answer. She set her fingers on his arm. The tension in his shoulders eased by a fraction, as if he had been braced for refusal and prepared to bear it. Together they stepped forward to the kettle while the yard watched, and when the cook ladled broth into her bowl first, no one argued. As they turned back toward the loft, Genevieve kept her hand where it was. She still carried fear, still measured risk in every room, still understood how quickly politics could sharpen into knives. Yet beneath all of that, a quieter certainty began to take shape. This male did not confuse protection with possession, and for the first time since chains had closed on her wrists, lowering her guard felt less like surrender and more like choosing where to stand. Choosing where to stand did not make the ground steady, but it gave Genevieve a direction, and she held to it as Sebastian walked her toward the infirmary steps through a corridor of watchful silence. They had reached the lower stair when Captain Ilya cut across the yard at a run, a young messenger dragged in his wake by the back of his coat. The messenger could not have seen 20 winters, all elbows in fear, boots skidding in mud as he tried and failed to bow at the same time. Ilya took a sealed leather tube from the boy's shaking hands and offered it to Sebastian with both palms. Caught at Eastgate, Ilya said. Claims he carried treaty notices for the neutral dens. He had 6 copies of this, and a coin purse stamped with Starfall Ridge Mint. Sebastian broke the wax with his thumb. Dark blue resin flaked onto his knuckles. Genevieve saw the crest before he folded the letter open. A hawk over a split moon, the starfall mark she remembered from audit sheets, routed through Eastern merchants. Sebastian read in silence, the muscle in his jaw set hard. Out loud, Genevieve said. He looked at her once, as if weighing whether to shield or involve, then passed her the page instead. The script was formal court hand, expensive paper, deliberate phrasing built for public recitation. To all Allied and neutral pacts under winter treaty consideration, Thornwood Harbor's confirmed asset Genevieve Ironhold, who sold patrol movements and den routes under payment from Starfall intermediaries. Witness statements attached. Thornwood Alpha has elevated a traitor female under mate pretext. This is not mercy. This is infiltration. Any pact signing water and grain accords with Thornwood accepts compromised intelligence and shared liability for resulting losses. The statement ended with a demand. Surrender Genevieve for cross-pact judgment before the Dark Moon gathering, or forfeit Starfall cooperation on Ridge Transit. Attached behind it, tied with twine, were 3 copied testimonies from Ironhold witnesses. Her former supervisor's signature sat at the bottom of the first one like a bruise. Mara swore under her breath. Captain Ilya exhaled slowly. He is not just attacking her, he is attacking your coalition. Sebastian took the pages back. He wants us isolated before snow closes the passes. Genevieve's fingers tightened around her broth bowl until heat bit through metal. He wants more than isolation. She pointed to the witness page margins. These notations are in my old office cipher, but 1 layer off. The clerk who forged this knew we coded transaction categories by moon phase. They copied the categories and missed the rotation key. That error is not random. It means the forger had partial access to my records and rushed. Ilya frowned. Can you prove that to anyone besides us? Yes, she said. If I have ink, a clean slate, and the original threshold logs from Ironhold Quarter Office. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Ironhold will refuse. Then refusal is evidence too. The captured messenger finally found his voice. I did not write any of it. I swear. I only carry what they pay me to carry. Who paid? Sebastian asked. The boy swallowed, eyes darting to Genevieve and away. A quartermaster out of East Ridge Depot. He said if I delivered before sundown I got double. Said every pack would need to know Thornwood took Starfall's cast-off spy to bed. Sebastian went very still. Name. Bran Kestrel. Ilya cursed quietly. Kestrel handled resupply contracts after the Ridge fires. If he is on Starfall's purse, he knows our routes. Sebastian handed the messenger to the guards without roughness. Food and a dry blanket. He gives full deposition at dusk. As the boy was led away, another runner arrived from the gate with 2 neutral pack delegates in tow, both wearing travel cloaks crusted in road salt. They did not bow. They stood in the mud and looked from Sebastian to Genevieve, with the wary politeness of wolves, deciding whether to flee a snare. We were handed these statements at noon, one said, pulling a folded copy from his belt. Our elders demand clarification before treaty signatures. Genevieve felt old tribunal cold crawl up her spine, Public accusation moved faster than truth because lies arrived pre-arranged. Truth had to gather witnesses one painful piece at a time. Sebastian did not posture. You will have clarification by morning counsel. You will also have the source chain for these pages and the financial records tied to their distribution. The second delegate looked at Genevieve's belly, then at the infirmary door. If this is a bond claim, some will call your judgment compromised. Some would call it that even if he cut the bond out of his own chest, Genevieve thought. Sebastian answered without looking away. My judgment is questioned every season. My ledgers are open every season. Come to council and test both. By dusk, rain had hardened into sleet, and the longhouse map room glowed with lamplight, wet wool, and tension. Genevieve sat at the end of a scarred table with copied statements spread around her, weighted by stone cups. Sebastian stood behind her shoulder for a time, then moved to the hearth when he realized his nearness made the room hold its breath. Ilya brought supply logs from the mine quarter office. Mara brought tea no one drank. Genevieve worked through the papers line by line, tracing pen pressure, ink flow, and ledger conventions the way another wolf might track blood across snow. Her pulse settled as numbers replaced noise. Under stress, data was mercy. I am back inside columns and margins where motives leave fingerprints. I know this terrain. I know how liars over-explain one line and forget another. I know where greed hides when it borrows the language of law. I also know my hands shake every time his scent reaches me from across the table, and I hate that my body keeps answering this bond while my mind is still counting exits. I want to trust him. I do not know if wanting is wisdom or exhaustion wearing a softer mask. If I step wrong, it is not only my life that pays. It is this child, this rebuilding pack, every worker already one failed winter from hunger. I need certainty. There is none. So I will build proof instead. Near midnight, she tapped one page. Here. Witness 2 claims I met a Starfall runner at Tannery Wall on 12th Frost. On 12th Frost, Ironhold closed South Quarter after a fever outbreak. I logged the closure myself. No one entered or exited without healer stamp. Ilya leaned in. Could they have altered that log too? They did not have to. They assumed no one would cross-check a health closure against a security statement. Sebastian moved to her side and braced his palms on the table, close, but not touching. What else? She pulled another sheet forward. Payment note references Obsidian lot transfer through Cold Harbor broker, but the broker mark uses blue mica blotting sand. She held the page to lamplight. Tiny flecks glinted. Ironhold uses plain ash sand. Blue mica comes from one pit in East Ridge. Starfall territory. Mara gave a short, disbelieving laugh. He forged proof and signed it with his own dust. Arrogance, Genevieve said. He expected panic, not audit. The room sharpened around that word. Sebastian's gaze lifted to Ilya. Send riders tonight. 1 to Cold Harbor Exchange requesting broker manifests. 1 to Ironhold demanding original quarantine and patrol logs under tribunal seal. Ilya hesitated. Ironhold may ignore us. Then we read their silence aloud at council. As orders flew, Genevieve gathered the statements into neat stacks and noticed a notation tucked in the corner of a distribution ledger. Moonless transfer, Reservoir Sector C, crew reassigned after second bell. The line was written in quartermaster shorthand, easy to miss unless you had spent years cleaning up men's lazy bookkeeping. Her stomach dropped. Stop, she said. Read this. Sebastian scanned the line. Reservoir maintenance. Not maintenance, timing. She dragged another page over, comparing marks. The same hand that copied these statements signed supply movement for mine reservoir valves. Moonless night, reduced watch, crew reassigned from waterworks to tribunal prep. Ilya's face hardened. That leaves the reservoir exposed. To what? Mara asked. Genevieve looked at the blue mica flecks, at the false testimonies built to paint her as poison inside Thornwood, and the answer came cold and clean. Contamination. 1 barrel of bitterroot concentrate in the upper cistern, and your whole lower camp gets sick enough to riot. Then Starfall broadcasts that Thornwood cannot protect its own water because it chose a traitor over discipline. Sebastian's voice went flat with controlled fury. He turns hunger into leverage and unrest into demand, Genevieve said. Execute me publicly to restore legitimacy. He gets your coalition either way. No one spoke for 3 breaths. Then Sebastian stripped his gloves off and pointed to the wall map. Ilya, double guard at all water points. Lock down valve houses. No one touches reservoir gates without 2 witnesses and healer clearance. Mara, prepare antidote stock for plant-based contaminants and move casks to upper infirmary. Genevieve stays in Fortress Ward. Genevieve was already on her feet. No. He turned. No. If your guards find suspicious barrels, they need someone who can tie shipment marks to these ledgers in real time. Starfall is counting on delay and confusion. I am counting on you surviving this night. I survive by being useful. The words hung between them, too sharp, too true. By the second night watch, sleet had stopped, and a moonless dark pressed against the longhouse windows like ink. Horn calls echoed from lower yards as patrol teams split toward the reservoir paths. Sebastian stood at the threshold of the map room in full battle leathers, dark hair damp at the temples, the old scar along his jaw pale in lamplight. He looked carved from oath and threat. When he spoke, his voice was roughened by things he was not saying. You stay with Mara in the upper corridor. 2 guards at your door. Genevieve stepped close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough that the bond tightened and steadied rather than burned. If this is about possession, you lose me. His gaze sharpened. It is about probability. An enemy who cannot break me in battle may try to break me through you. Then let me choose the risk. He stared at her for a long moment, conflict moving through his expression in hard, visible lines. At last he held out a short, iron whistle on a leather cord. 1 blast, corridor guard comes. 2 blasts, whole floor locks down. She took it. Their fingers brushed. The pull between them flared bright and immediate, and for 1 bare second the map room, the war, the accusations. All of it narrowed to breath and skin, and the fragile, fierce relief of being seen without being erased. Sebastian bent his head, stopped a hand's breadth from her forehead, and waited. She closed the distance herself, resting brow to brow with him. Nothing more, the contact reverent and steady. Come back, she said. I intend to. He left with Ilya and 12 guards, boots striking the stair in hard unison. The first alarm came less than an hour later. 3 heavy bell strikes from the south slope, the signal for breach at critical infrastructure. Mara shoved a satchel into Genevieve's hands and pulled her toward the upper balcony overlooking the lower yard. From there they could see torchlight racing along the reservoir road in broken lines, shadows surging and scattering where patrols converged. A guard ran up the stair 2 at a time, breath smoking in the cold. Raiders at Sector C valve house. 5 confirmed, maybe more in tree line. 2 barrels seized with unknown compound, 1 already cracked near intake trench. Mara swore and started issuing orders for charcoal slurry and boiled water protocols. Another bell rang, then another, faster, urgent. Genevieve gripped the rail until splinters bit her palm. Something in the cadence was wrong. Reservoir breach calls came in 3s. This was staggered, uneven, like 2 different alarms colliding. She turned to the guard. Where is the second signal from? He blinked. Not sure. Lower east, maybe. A shout rose from the courtyard below. Then a runner burst through the gate, mud to his knees, voice cracking as he yelled toward the stairwell. Diversion! He gasped. Reservoir was a feint. East holding cells attacked. They were after the captured courier and deposition records. The world seemed to lurch under Genevieve's feet. If the courier disappeared, if his testimony vanished, Starfall's forged chain regained its teeth by dawn. Mara grabbed Genevieve's arm. Inside. Now! Before either moved, a third runner slammed into the yard, bloodless with panic but unhurt, pointing toward the old records annex behind the longhouse. "Fire at archive door!" he shouted. Someone lit pitch at the ledger vault. Captain Ilya requests Genevieve Ironhold immediately. He says only she can identify which seals are genuine before the heat takes the room. "Inside," Mara ordered again, fingers tightening on Genevieve's arm. Genevieve pulled free, already moving toward the stair. If the vault burns, Starfall keeps the only version of truth left standing. The guard hesitated only a beat, then ran beside them as they cut through the upper corridor into a stairwell thick with smoke. Pitch stung Genevieve's throat. Her lungs still remembered Shaft 7, and panic scraped up fast, but she held the rail and forced each breath into account. Down one flight, then another. Boots and bare feet hammering wood all around them as healers hauled water buckets upward, while guards rushed down with wet cloaks over their mouths. At the annex door, Captain Ilya stood in a spray of sparks, sword bare, two wolves in partial shift trying to force the iron-hasped ledger vault with hooked tools. One wore thornwood colors, the other wore none. Ilya drove the first back with a shoulder check and shouted, "Genevieve, seals now, which chest first?" Heat rolled out of the archive room in hard waves. Shelves crackled at the far wall where Pitch had climbed the timber. Genevieve ducked under Ilya's arm and dropped to the floor by three iron-bound trunks lined against the vault gate. Wax seals gleamed through soot. One red, one black, one blue flecked. "Black chest is quarter disbursement copies," she said, voice raw. "Useful, but replaceable. Red is tribunal originals. Blue is forgery chain and courier deposition. Blue first." Ilya barked orders. "Darren, lift blue. Kesh, smother that wall. Do not break seals." The wolf in thornwood colors lunged again. Mara swung her satchel like a flail and caught him in the temple with a jar that burst in a bitter cloud of dried nettle and chalk. He cursed, blinded, and Ilya's pommel struck his wrist hard enough to drop the tool. The second infiltrator bolted for the inner corridor. "Take him alive!" Ilya snapped. Genevieve pushed up too fast, dizziness tilting the room. A cramp cinched low across her abdomen, hot and sudden. Mara saw her fold and came to her side at once. "Sit down." "No." Genevieve pressed one palm under her belly until the tightening eased. "If they came for records and the courier, Starfall is close. This is synchronized. He will not trust this to hired hands." Ilya swore softly, then nodded once, accepting what he already knew. "He wants public collapse, not just fire." From the yard outside came a clang of metal on stone, then the first scream. Not a death scream. Alarm. A horn answered from the gate tower, two long calls for breach inside the walls. The next moments fractured into motion. Guards dragged the sealed trunks into the rain. Mara shouted for a litter Genevieve refused to use. Somewhere in the lower yard, a horse shrieked and went down. Through the smoke-hazed archway, Genevieve saw figures in borrowed cloaks cut across the torchlight in disciplined formation. Not raiders scrambling for loot, but a strike team moving toward a target. Toward her. Ilya saw it too. "They are driving to the tribunal yard," he said. "If he takes the stone circle platform, he controls what gets witnessed." Genevieve's hand found the whistle cord at her throat. "Then we make sure everyone witnesses." She did not ask permission. She ran. By the time she reached the cross corridor between the annex and the old tribunal passage, her side ached and her breath came ragged. But she kept pace with Ilya's guards by using corners, rails, and walls, conserving force where she could. The fortress sounded different now. Every strike and shout bouncing through stone in overlapping echoes that made direction hard to read. This was the chaos Starfall had planned for. Noise, smoke, divided command, one decisive story planted while truth choked. I am done waiting for men with titles to decide whether my life is admissible evidence. I know what he built. A lie with paperwork, fear, and timing. I also know how to break it, not by pleading, not by hiding until dawn and hoping reason returns. I break it by making his methods visible in front of wolves who cannot pretend they did not see. I am shaking, I am in pain, and I am still the best clerk in either territory when the stakes are law. Let them call me condemned, female, inconvenient, compromised. Let them call me anything they want after they hear the numbers. At the junction above the mine descent shaft, she reached the emergency chain assembly used for cave-ins and toxic leaks, 3 linked bell lines that, when pulled in sequence, sealed gate bars at the tribunal approaches and locked the inner yard doors until a captain released them with 2 keys. Miners used it once every decade. Most wolves forgot it existed. Genevieve grabbed the first chain and pulled with both hands. A bell boomed deep under the floors. She pulled the second, then the third, teeth clenched against another abdominal grip. Across the compound, iron gates slammed in staggered thunder. Corridor bars dropped. The escape routes narrowed to the tribunal yard exactly as she intended. Ilya stared at her, startled despite himself. "You just trapped everyone inside." "Exactly," she said. "No rewritten version by sunrise." 3 minutes later, torchlight flooded the stone tribunal yard as locked passages funneled guards, delegates, workers, and attackers into the same open square. Rain hissed on flames. The neutral pack delegates from earlier stood near the west colonnade under guard, mud still on their cloaks, faces pale as they realized they were now witnesses, not observers. Sebastian Thornwood entered from the south arch with 4 wolves at his back, blood on one sleeve that was not his, expression carved into lethal focus. His gaze found Genevieve across the yard, taking in the soot on her face, the sealed blue chest beside Captain Ilya, and the locked gates overhead. Understanding landed in his features like flint catching. Opposite him, beneath the tribunal dais where she had once been condemned, Sebastian Starfall stepped from a ring of his remaining fighters and removed his hood. He was broader than Rumor, silver at the temples, handsome in the polished, predatory way of wolves accustomed to obedience bought with spectacle. His smile did not reach his eyes. "So this is the female," Starfall said, voice carrying. "The one you would risk winter for." Sebastian Thornwood did not move. "You breached my waterworks, my cells, and my archives under treaty flag. Surrender now, and your wolves live to see judgment." Starfall laughed, low and contemptuous. "You rebuilt rubble, not loyalty. Look at them." He gestured at the crowd with a blood-specked hand. "Hungry miners, frightened widows, delegates counting grain. Give me the female, and I leave your whelps alive." A growl rolled through Thornwood ranks. Sebastian Thornwood stepped forward once, but Genevieve lifted her hand. "Hold," she said, and he did. She walked into the open center of the yard, unarmored, belly unmistakable under her damp wool shift and Sebastian's cloak. Rain slicked her hair to her neck. Every eye tracked her. Starfall's expression sharpened. "Careful, Genevieve. You were easier to bury when you stayed quiet." She met his gaze and pitched her voice for the far stones. "You did not destroy me when I was alone. You will not own me now." She pointed to Captain Ilya. "Open the blue chest." Ilya broke the wax under witness, withdrew the deposition pages and ledger copies, and handed them to the nearest neutral delegate. Genevieve did not rush. She named each line, each rotation key, each forged moon phase category, each blue mica trace that tied Starfall's quartermaster to the counterfeit chain. She cited the 12th Frost quarantine closure impossible to bypass, the Valve crew reassignment timed to tribunal prep, the payment route through East Ridge Mint, the courier's seized purse, The breached holding cell. The archive pitch. As she spoke, scribes wrote. Delegates compared margins. Murmurs shifted from suspicion to grim recognition. Starfall's mask cracked first at the mention of Blue Mika, then at Brankestrel's name, then at the courier himself, dragged into the yard by guards, shaken but alive, who pointed at Starfall without hesitation and croaked. He ordered all copies delivered before Dark Moon Council. He said panic signs faster than proof. The yard inhaled. Starfall moved. He crossed the distance in a feral burst, claws breaking through his fingertips, canines lengthening as the predator surfaced through human form. He was fast enough that two guards misjudged the angle. Fast enough that Sebastian Thornwood's lunge came a heartbeat late, not too late for Genevieve. She had already marked the tool rack by the mine gate arch. Emergency spikes, hammerheads, coil hooks. She grabbed a silver-tipped mining spike, pivoted on her left foot, and drove it low and hard into Starfall's thigh as he came within reach. The impact knocked him sideways with a strangled roar, pinning his leg against the stone edge of the drainage channel. He slashed for her shoulder and caught only Cloak. Sebastian Thornwood hit him then, full force, taking both of them down across wet flagstone. They rolled once in a tangle of claws and fists before Sebastian shifted further, wolf strength flooding his frame, and slammed Starfall flat with a forearm at his throat. Starfall spat rain and blood-tinged saliva, still grinning through pain. A broken female made you weak. Sebastian Thornwood's blade flashed to Starfall's neck, steady as judgment. She made us unbreakable. Wait, Genevieve said. The word cut through the snarls. Sebastian held, blade unmoving. Genevieve turned to the delegates and the gathered pack. You all heard his demand. You all saw forged evidence, coordinated sabotage, attempted abduction, and assault in open tribunal. Record this as cross-pack treachery, witnessed by neutral dens, mine guild, and healer authority. No retaliation claim survives this night. The first delegate, jaw tight, lifted his hand. Recorded. The second followed. Witnessed and binding. Mara stepped forward. Voice iron. Witnessed. Ilya. Witnessed. Only then did Genevieve nod to Sebastian. The execution stroke was clean, one decisive movement, no spectacle. Starfall went still under the rain, while the yard held silence that felt less like shock and more like recalibration. An entire coalition watching one era end and another begin in the same breath. Sebastian rose slowly, chest heaving, then turned at once to Genevieve, dropping to one knee in the water-slick torchlight to check her face, her hands, the line of her shoulders, asking nothing aloud until she gave the smallest nod that she was standing, still standing. Behind them, Captain Ilya ordered Starfall's surviving fighters disarmed and bound for Dawn Tribunal transfer. The blue chest was resealed under triple witness. The courier was moved to guarded infirmary care. Gate chains were released in controlled sequence, one corridor at a time, while scribes copied the night's testimony onto fresh vellum before any hand could alter it. When the last alarm bell faded, the moonless dark remained, but its leverage was gone. Genevieve stood in the center of the yard with rain on her lashes, pain in her back, soot on her palms, and proof secured in open law. And for the first time since Ironhold's sentence fell, the future in front of her felt like something built rather than begged for. Mara reached Genevieve first in the rain-slick yard, palms firm on her cheeks, then her pulse, then the curve of her abdomen, clinical even with ash on her sleeves. Pain pattern. Cramping, not regular, Genevieve said, breath still ragged from the sprint and the strike. Child is moving. Mara nodded once. Good. You are done standing in storms for one night. Sebastian did not argue with the healer. He rose from Starfall's body, wiped his blade, and handed it hilt first to Ilya, before turning back to Genevieve, with rain running down his scar and a question in his eyes that he refused to force into her mouth. Around them, the square had shifted from battle to record. Scribes writing under guarded torchlight, delegates sealing witness copies, bound infiltrators marched in pairs, the blue chest transferred to the tribunal table under triple lock. Rurik Vale stepped out from the mine line, missing fingers wrapped around a ledger board he must have taken from the quarter office. His gaze met Genevieve's, no longer unreadable. "I kept the original water denial complaint," he said hoarsely. "Foreman tried to bury it after first bell. I hid it under cart tallies." He held the board toward Ilya. "If law means anything tonight, use it." Ilya took it with a warrior's solemnity. Entered. At the edge of the yard, Tomas Var stood bound, shoulders caved in, and did not contest the charge when Mara identified him and Rurik's page was read aloud. The captured courier, blanketed and shaking, repeated his deposition under witness without retracting a word. No one could claim confusion now. No one could claim missing records. The neutral delegates approached through the wet torch smoke. "Starfall is dead by lawful witness," the elder one said. "Bond claims are still contested between packs when force is involved." His eyes moved from Genevieve's bruised wrists to Sebastian's face. "If you intend formal claiming, do it with healer and counsel present, tonight. No coercion, no loopholes." Sebastian's gaze never left Genevieve. "Only if she asks it." Genevieve felt the bond hum under pain, exhaustion, and a fierce, quiet clarity. She had been judged without voice once. She would not be carried through this by silence. "I ask it," she said. "In the stone circle, witnessed. Equal marks." Something in Sebastian's expression went unguarded then. Gratitude and reverence and disbelief braided tight. He bowed his head to her, not to the council. "As you choose, mate." The stone circle sat above the longhouse on a ridge scraped clean by winter winds, its ancient monoliths black against a clearing sky. Clouds broke as they climbed, and moonlight spilled over wet granite, silvering the runes cut into each standing stone. Healers ringed the circle with satchels open. Elders and delegates stood beyond them, close enough to witness, far enough to leave the center to choice. By the time the moon cleared fully, the air had turned sharp and cold, smelling of pine, iron, and rain-washed ash from old fires that had once gutted this territory. Genevieve stood wrapped in a dry cloak with her hair damp at her neck, one hand beneath her belly where their daughter shifted, steady and alive. Sebastian faced her in dark leathers, chest rising slowly as if each breath required discipline. Elder Morel's counterpart from a neutral den stepped forward with a ceremonial blade and cut a shallow line across his own palm, letting blood strike stone. "Witnessed claiming under moon law, consent stated by both or the right ends." Sebastian spoke first, voice low but carrying to every stone. "Genevieve Ironhold, I choose you without condition. I will not confine, trade, or silence you. I will not use bond as law over your will. Do you consent to my mark?" "I consent," she said. "Do you consent to mine?" His answer came without pause. "I consent." Then, in a gesture that rippled through the witnesses, he dropped to one knee and bared his throat first, exposing the pulse point to her teeth. Not dominance. Trust offered where power usually demanded surrender. Genevieve touched his jaw with trembling fingers, then guided him up. "Together," she whispered. He nodded, stepped close, and waited until she tilted her head, exposing the juncture of neck and shoulder. His hand braced her upper back, broad and warm, while his other palm settled over her wrist as if anchoring both of them to the same moment. When his fangs pierced skin, the pain was clean and bright, a hard flash that stole her breath. Heat followed immediately, pouring through the bite in molten waves, racing down her spine and out through her limbs. The circle blurred, the bond roared open. She felt him. Not impressions. Him. grief from burning camps, and names he still recited in the dark. Relentless responsibility. The precise instant in Shaft 7 when he had seen her collapse and known, with terrifying certainty, that fate had placed his life in her hands. Beneath that devotion so unembarrassed it shook her. The pain transformed, edge softening into a deep, pulsing warmth that spread to her abdomen. Their child kicked once, then settled as golden current moved through all three of them like a shared heartbeat. Sebastian drew back, breathing hard, forehead dropping to hers. "Mine," he whispered, not as possession but as vow. Genevieve cupped the back of his neck, turned him, and bared his throat to the moon. He held still, eyes on hers, trust absolute now that she had seen every unhealed scar inside him. She bit where neck met shoulder, deeper than she expected, and he shuddered violently, one hand gripping her waist, the other bracing against the stone at her back. A low sound tore from him, half pain, half wonder. Warmth flooded her mouth, iron and rain. Power answered power, rushing through the bond in the opposite direction, carrying her memories into him. Tribunal chains, forged ledgers, hunger, humiliation, the stubborn arithmetic of survival, and the moment she chose to pull the emergency bells and force truth into open law. He took it all without flinching. He did not look away. When she released him, blood beaded at his skin, and the mirrored marks at their throats ignited in soft gold, then settled into a steady ember glow. Sebastian dropped fully to both knees, not from weakness but from the force of completion, hands wrapped around her hips as if he had finally reached solid ground. "Yours," he said into the hollow below her ribs. "Mate," she answered, tears hot on cold cheeks. The witnesses did not cheer. They bowed their heads, solemn because they had just watched two wolves choose each other in full law after war, accusation, and blood. Mara stepped in only to check the marks and pronounced them sealed. No one challenged her. Later, when the circle emptied and only moonlight remained, Sebastian sat with Genevieve on the lowest stone step. Cloak around both of them, his palms spread over her belly while their daughter rolled lazily beneath his hand. The bond had changed from wildfire to foundation, a low, constant thrum that no longer demanded. It simply remained. At dawn, tribunal reconvened in the same yard where she had once been sentenced. The three trunks stood on the platform in plain view, blue for forgery chain and deposition, red for original tribunal records, black for disbursement copies. Under witness, each was opened, inventoried, and entered into Allied Archive custody. Nothing vanished, nothing was misplaced. A rider returned before second bell from Cold Harbor with broker manifests bearing East Ridge blue mica, blotting traces, and Brankestrel's seal. Another returned from Ironhold with Aldrich's refusal to appear, but enclosed behind it was a clerk-certified copy of the 12th Frost quarantine closure, stamped by Elder Morell's own office. Refusal and proof, side by side. The council entered both. When called to the platform, Morell arrived by noon under neutral escort, face drawn, robes travel-stained. She read from the reversal writ with a voice that trembled only once. By verified evidence and allied witness, sentence against Genevieve Ironhold is null. All charges attached to root sale accusation are vacated. Record amended in perpetuity. Aldrich did not come. His absence was noted as contempt of interpack process, and Ironhold's winter vote was suspended pending internal audit. No one softened the wording. Thomas Var was stripped of rank and assigned restitution labor under guild supervision. Rurik accepted appointment as interim line steward and signed the new water rights rule with his own ink-stained hand. The courier, whose name was Pellin, chose protected clerk service in Thornwood rather than return east. He spent his first safe night asleep at a table with his cheek on a ledger and a full bowl untouched beside him. 3 weeks later, under bright spring sun in the mine yard, Sebastian and Genevieve stood before workers as the penal code tablets were removed from the gate and replaced with guild contracts, paid shifts, safety quotas, healer authority over labor assignments, and mandatory dual witness logs for every disciplinary order. Genevieve signed first as Luna Regent of Reconstruction, title newly ratified by council vote. Sebastian signed beside her, then stepped back, so she could address the crowd alone. "No female will be buried by accusation here again," she said, voice clear over pick and hammer silence. "No worker disappears into a ledger error. If law cannot be audited, it is not law, it is fear." When she finished, the first bow came from Mara, deliberate and unsentimental. Ilya followed, then Rurik, then the yard. By midsummer, banners in thornwood, black and silver snapped above the rebuilt longhouse, and Genevieve stood beneath them with Sebastian at her side and their daughter, Leora, sleeping in her arms with one tiny fist tucked against the mark on Genevieve's neck. The pack gathered in the square not by summons horn but by choice, traders and miners and widows and apprentices crowding shoulder to shoulder while children wove between boots, in the safe, bright noise of an ordinary feast day. Mara inspected Leora's lungs and declared them offensively strong. Ilya presented the final archive inventory showing the blue, red, and black records transferred to Stone Vault custody with duplicate copies at 2 neutral dens. Pellin read treaty confirmations aloud, including grain accords that had held through thaw. Even a sealed notice from Ironhold was read and entered. Aldrich had abdicated under council pressure. Morel retired. A new audit bench requested training from Thornwood clerks. Sebastian